Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunch break potentially or midday morning, wherever you are located with us. I'm so excited that Shelagh has agreed to chat with us about eating for optimized hormones. I think that this is such a big topic. And one of the reasons that I really wanted us to talk about this is one of the things that I see with health coaching clients and people in our community is just that as females, a lot of times we're just not eating enough. And some of that is knowing what to eat, when to eat it. I think sometimes cycle syncing and having these like guidelines for like eat these foods then and these foods then can be really hard for us. And then we kind of feel stuck and unsure what to do next. But I think today, just talking through kind of like whole foods, a balanced plate, and what that looks like is going to be really helpful for all of us because food is nutrition, food is energy, and that is such an important part of our hormonal journey. So I'm going to pass it over to Shelagh. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm so excited for you to share your expertise with us. And everyone who is here tuned in, please do go ahead and drop questions in the chat. Any feedback in the chat, make sure you are sharing along the way. And we're so excited to answer your questions. And off to you, Shelagh.
Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy to be here. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get this show going. All right. So can we all see this?
Yes.
Yes. Lovely. All right. Cool. So welcome, everybody. Today we're going to chat about what to eat for optimal hormone health. A little bit about myself, some street cred. My name is Shelagh. I know it doesn't look anything like that. That's why I always put my pronunciation in my Zoom name. So I am a holistic hormone dietitian. I am trained in functional medicine and I specialize in hormone health. I also practice somatics. So those of you who might be familiar, soma means body. So it's basically just like body-based practices that I use for both my nutrition clients and I'm also a yoga teacher. So releasing, moving energy, getting in touch with your body. I also am a human with PCOS, which is how I got into the hormone health world in the first place and the functional nutrition world in the first place. And a little bit about what my life used to like and used to look like and what I used to be like. So I used to be a very classic archetype of like the woman who's trying to be smaller. I was vegetarian. I did so much cardio with no strength training. I used to be a spin instructor. Sometimes I would teach like two classes a day and then take one, counting my calories. MyFitnessPal was always on the phone, just kind of like always trying the next thing. What can I cut out? And it definitely led to a lot of restriction that took me a few years to shake. Sorry, I'm just going to keep my eye on the chat, which is just you, Monica. Okay, great. I also felt terrible. I was literally a dietitian, trying to eat all the vegetables, do all the things, eat all the whole foods, paleo, etc. Felt terrible, exhausted. I would like sleep 10 hours and feel like I got hit by a bus. I was always bloated. My period was completely missing for like a year and then kind of just sporadic for a while. I used to have hormonal acne, terrible anxiety, and I was also obsessed with food because I wasn't letting myself eat any of it. So if any of you guys are less than happy with your hormone journey or where you're at right now, I've been there. I see you. We're going to be all right. So, what we're going to talk about today. So, we're going to keep this really simple because I find that simplicity is what often people are missing. So, we're going to talk about the most common mistakes that I see people making for their nutrition and their hormone health, and then what to do instead. We'll keep it super simple. I want to just preface all of this with saying that, like, if this is new information, that would make sense. If you feel like you are confused in navigating your health, your nutrition, what to eat, how to take care of yourself, that would make perfect sense because so many of us were taught how to diet. We were not taught how to eat. I think that the content of this presentation is something that we all should have been given, like in a middle school health class, and kind of just weren't. So if this is new information to you, if you like are surprised that you didn't know, it's not your fault. Nobody told you. Something that I hear a lot from clients is, I feel like I'm doing everything right, but, and then with love, I always say, well, if you still don't feel good, it's a good chance you're probably not doing everything, quote, right. And that's not your fault. I can't believe I didn't know this. I can. We weren't taught right? Like we don't just come into this world knowing how to do taxes. Someone teaches us how to do taxes. And also, I hear a lot, listening to your body is kind of like sexy online right now. And a lot of times I hear, if I listened to my body, I would either eat all day or never eat in regards to, intuitive eating and whatnot. And that makes sense too. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can sort of like retrain your body to come back online with hunger cues and listening to your intuition and whatnot. So, on that, listening to your body is always communicating with you. Your body is always trying to collaborate with you. And your body's primary intention is always to keep you alive. Your survival is the top priority for your body. And if we can start to understand how our body is speaking to us, how our bodies are taking care of us, we can shift into this like manipulative, white knuckling relationships with our bodies. If maybe we're trying to lose weight or change our body composition or get our cycles to be a certain way, if we can shift out of that into this like collaborative experience where, we're listening to our bodies, course correcting, giving it what it's asking for, etc. It one is going to actually give your body what it needs, which is going to make it look like what you want it to look like, or that's not a guarantee, of course, right? But like we can heal your metabolism. And also, too, it's just going to give you a much more powerful relationship with your body, a much more positive relationship with your body. And I'm also a big believer. I said I was a yoga teacher. I'm big into like mind, body, soul stuff. I believe that your physical body is like a channel and a vessel to listen to your intuition. So if your body, your physical body is giving you alarm bells from 100 different directions, from you're hungry, you've had too much caffeine, you haven't slept enough, you've overexercised, whatever it is, that can feel confusing in terms of like listening to your intuition is like, what is your gut instinct telling you? So if we can nourish our physical body, it also just like helps you tap into your soul and into your intuition as well. So shifting out of the diet mentality, when we can let go of this like such a hard grip on what we're trying to get our body to look like and shift into what it actually needs, how can we take care of it? And we're going to go over what those things are. That is usually when we experience this like metabolic rehab and we can allow your body to enter this sense of like nourished safety where it doesn't have to hold on so tight to any excess calories that it might be, or excess energy, I should say, that it's holding on to. And really enter this, like quote, happy weight that you might hear about in terms of just like the weight that your body wants to be when it's adequately fed and in a healthy place. So, the biggest mistakes that I see, and these might be surprising if you are someone who is in like the 90% of the population. So, the most common things that I see, under eating at baseline. I'm gonna, if you have ever had MyFitnessPal or Noom or anything like that and typed in your information, it very often just spews out 1,200 calories, and we'll get into that, but like that is appropriate for a toddler. So under eating is the big one. Under eating macronutrients, and then also under eating micronutrients. We'll get into the nitty gritty of all of these. Lack of meal balance, and then poor meal timing. So we'll talk about what to do instead of all of those things. But I reference this meme all the time to my clients, so I decided to just make one myself like a week ago. So you might have seen this meme before of the staircase, and basically the essence is we're skipping over steps 1 through 5 and trying to go right to step 6 when we're in this like world of trendy solutions, and obviously like not talking about the Marea multivitamin, like that's very different than sea moss gel. But if our foundations are not, you know, set like secure, I guess, if they're not like solid, then that sea moss gel is just like an expensive waste of money. I would put like an Armra colostrum in this same category, like anything that's just like berberine, right? Like a multivitamin is not going to count as a step 5. I would actually say that's pretty foundational, but it's like the random sexy supplements that you would never have heard of if it didn't have like a moment in the limelight on social media. So what we're going to be talking about today is these first 4 steps here. So what to do instead? We're just flipping a lot of these. Eat enough food. We'll talk about what that looks like. We'll talk about what enough carbs looks like, enough protein, eating whole foods, eating balanced meals, and mastering your meal timing. I'm talking really quickly because I have a tendency to chit chat, and we are going to talk about all these on their own slides. So, eat enough food. What does that look like? So, as I said before, 1,200 calories are the needs of a toddler. I, of course, cannot tell all of you what the exact energy intake is most appropriate for each of you because I don't know you guys. But most adults could use between like 1,800 and 24 calories a day. If you are very active, it's going to be more than this. If you're very tall, it's going to be more than this. If you have a lot of muscle mass, it's going to be more than this. You guys get where I'm going with this. Also, your energy needs are going to change throughout the month as well. If you are a cycling person, our metabolism will increase in our luteal phase in that second half of the cycle. So I'm not here to tell you how many calories to eat, but if you are eating less than 1,800, I would argue that's not enough without even knowing you. I feel that confident to say that. And why this is important. So, body safety is a theme that I reference often with my clients, and just that your body needs to feel safe in order to keep you alive, right? In order to keep this ship going. So, not enough food, lack of body safety, and that can lead to a whole cascade downstream. You guys might remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs from like high school bio class, that pyramid, where the bottom part of your pyramid is like immediate physiological needs like food, shelter, and water. That's number one, right? Like that's what we're talking about. If this staircase is the pyramid, eating enough calories is the first thing. And if we have chronically under eating, and so that might not even be intentional, that could be if you're someone who maybe like never feels hungry, so you just don't eat that much, or you eat like a bird throughout the day. This is usually conditioned. This does not mean that, your body just thrives on 1,400 calories. But going back to your body is really smart and it's always trying to protect you. So if you are under eating for an extended period of time, your body is going to register, okay, let's start to slow things down and start to work really efficiently, right? And when I use the word efficient, I just mean that your body is starting to get a lot of bang for your buck for every calorie, every piece of energy that you put into it, because it can't necessarily trust that there's going to be more later. So oftentimes I find like people have been under eating for a long time and their bodies are holding on to weight and they're experiencing like weight loss resistance or fat loss resistance. And that is a protective mechanism. So again, another example of how can we shift into understanding the why and appreciate how our bodies are trying to protect us so that we can like adjust accordingly and work with that. Your hunger cues can change. If you are someone who never feels hungry, we can sort of retrain your body, rehab your hunger fullness cues, rehab your metabolism to start to feel hungry at appropriate times. If you are not hungry in the morning, and we'll get into meal timing, that's always like a little bit of a red flag from your body. Appetite in the morning is a sign of a nice, strong, healthy metabolism. All right, eat enough carbs. This one is probably the top mistake that I see people making. Carbohydrates are misunderstood. They are the biggest group of macronutrient. And I think for that reason, the whole group gets a bad rep. So you do need carbs. We all need carbs. No matter what, even if you have PCOS, even if you have insulin resistance, even if you have diabetes, you need carbs. It's just, how much and what pairing and how can we be strategic about it? Carbs are your body's preferred source of energy in that they are digested the fastest and utilized as energy the fastest. So that's why, one, if you are someone who is an athlete or ever does any sort of endurance event, they give you those goos or a banana, right? Someone with diabetes, with low blood sugar, what do we give them? Like a piece of candy, right? And that's because we know that that carb is going to be utilized as energy to get us out of this sort of acute low blood sugar state the fastest. So the average person needs 30 to 60 grams of carbs per meal, not per day. So just to give you an estimate of what that really looks like. So the average piece of bread is about 15 grams of carbs. I think a cup of rice is like 40, 45. And your brain alone uses over 100 grams of carbs per day. So that could give you just a little bit of perspective. You can probably start to do the math in your head. Are you getting enough? And this is also for like the average person who is not doing a lot of activity. So if you are a very active person, it's likely that you will need even more. As I said before, carbs are a really large group of macronutrients. So you do want to be mindful of the kinds that you're choosing. Ideally, they would be the more whole food forms of carbs. So things like whole grains and fruits and starchy vegetables, beans, lentils, even some dairy products have carbohydrate in them. Butter is not a carb. And that's not even a joke. I'm not making a Mean Girls quote, but that is something that I do need to clear up. But what does that look like? So a few more examples of 30 to 60 grams of carbs. We can all read, so I will not bore you with reading the numbers, but it's probably more than you would think. I'm just going to read this question. Jess, I wonder what you are eating in the morning. That could make a difference. And then coffee first thing, I actually that's not an explicit like mistake that I'll list, but I will say that's kind of woven in here. I would always recommend when possible, yeah, that people are having their coffee after their food just for that cortisol and so that your body can sort of have a little bit of a buffer. But I would be curious about what you're eating in the morning that's maybe making you tired. Okay, moving on. So eat enough protein. What does that look like? The average person needs 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. I really prefer 30 when I can get people to do it. 30 grams of protein is where we're going to hit that threshold that we can activate that protein muscle synthesis. So if we want to be getting muscle growth, that 30 grams is really helpful. And again, what that looks like, one egg is only 6 or 7 grams of protein, maybe eight, depending on the size of the egg. This is, again, I would call this a mistake. People just having like 2 eggs for breakfast. And that is really only half of that protein goal that we're looking for. But 1 ounce of lean meat is about 7 grams. A quick reference so that you can tell how much that is. About the palm of your hand is about the portion size for a piece of animal protein. Of course, everybody has different hands and different meats are going to have different fat amounts in it and whatnot. But that's a very quick way just to check and see how much you're having. Protein sources to choose most of the time. Good quality meat. I am a little bit picky when it comes to meat quality. It doesn't need to be like organic everything, but if it is red meat, particularly, I would say like grass-fed and finished is better quality when we can get it. Of course, accessibility is a thing. Higher quality meat is going to be more expensive, but with certain meats, particularly red meat, I do think it's worth it. Same thing for dairy. I always recommend organic dairy when possible. Eggs, Greek yogurt is great, cottage cheese is great, beans. Soy, I will say, is fine, but again, that is something I would recommend organic or non-GMO for soy. It's one of the more highly sprayed crops like in the world in terms of pesticide use. So it is worth it to get a good quality soy. I also do typically just recommend for protein, if you are someone who has animal proteins in your diet, to get most of your protein from animal sources just because it's going to be more bioavailable than a plant protein in that your body is actually going to absorb more of it, right? If you see 10 grams of protein on a plant-based protein bar, you're actually only going to be getting about 6 of those grams just because it's not as bioavailable. And this is coming from someone, I was a diehard vegetarian, my friends. Like, I was like, I won't even date someone who's not a vegetarian. So if you are like on the vegetarian game, I would just encourage you to question the sources on all those the Netflix documentaries about, who's funding those and whatnot. And also just start to think about like if it's an ethics thing or an environment thing, you can look into regenerative agriculture. That's a really cool way of making it more sustainable. But I do think that especially for hormone health and female health, animal protein is just a more nourishing option than plant. Also, plant proteins are not going to be complete proteins with the exception of soy. So you do want to just be making sure that you're at least pairing like two plant proteins together so that we can make that complete protein. And if anybody doesn't know what I mean when I say complete or not complete, you can just pop that in the chat. But basically, we have essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. The essential ones we have to get from food. The non-essential, our bodies can make them, which is super cool. But animal proteins are going to have all of your essential amino acids, with the exception of collagen, I should say. And plant proteins are not. So for that reason also, it's just a little easier to eat some meat and move on, as opposed to kind of pairing and matching and whatnot. But I know it's a personal choice sometimes. But what does 30 grams of protein look like? So again, this is all listed here, but a combo that I like, if you are someone who does the 2 eggs for breakfast, is just half a cup of cottage cheese with 2 eggs, like whisked together, like scrambled eggs. It's so easy and it tastes pretty good. I've also seen people put plain Greek yogurt in with scrambled eggs. I'm not sure if anybody here has tried that. I've heard it's a similar effect in terms of the texture and the flavor and consistency, but another easy way to get that in there. Most people probably wouldn't eat 5 eggs. This is just listed here so that you can kind of see how much protein is really in an egg. And yeah, like a whole cup of lentils, that's a lot. So if you are a vegetarian, you want to just be mindful of how much food you're going to have to be eating to get that 30 grams. I'm just going to check on the chat. Actually, I'm going to do it at the end because I don't want to get overwhelmed. Monica, you're doing a great job moderating. Okay. So eat balanced meals, moving on. So we've talked about the macros, but eating them together in appropriate portions is also kind of like the next piece of the puzzle. You'll also notice I didn't say like eat enough fat because that's just not something that I see as a mistake. Fat is very important for hormone health. I have just found that if we're going to highlight like what people are mostly missing, that's not something that people are mostly missing, just because I think it's like an after effect of like the keto craze. And everyone's using, almond flour crackers, and there's just a lot of higher fat switches that are already happening in people's diets, like nuts and seeds and like full fat dairy, which is what I do recommend for hormone health. Sometimes we can get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, what's your caloric needs? And right, it's easy to accidentally overdo it with the fat. So that's why it's not listed there. Of course, it's still important, but it's something that most people I find are getting enough of good quality fat. But we do want to be making sure that we are pairing these macronutrients together and appropriately. And so why that is for several different reasons, largely for balanced blood sugar. So we'll get more into this with meal timing, but blood sugar balance is so, so important for hormone health for lots of reasons. But even if we're just going to think about like the immediate benefits of it, balanced blood sugar will help you have better focus, steadier mood, steadier energy. Your hunger fullness levels can balance out a little bit more if your meals are balanced appropriately. You can sleep better. This is a sneaky thing that I see. Clients will be sleeping really poorly and then we'll balance their blood sugar and then they start to sleep better. And this is because we haven't even really talked a ton about cortisol in here, but it's woven into all of this. I did mention it down here, just regulated cortisol. So cortisol is also, I would say, misunderstood. I think that everyone's talking about how everyone's cortisol levels are too high, and that is largely true. A lot of us do have cortisol levels that are too high. But cortisol is also important, and we do need it. So cortisol functions as a glucocorticoid, which just means that it helps regulate your blood glucose levels. And so going back to this theme of your body is going to always try to keep you alive no matter what. That is going to be true with this cortisol support of your blood sugar. So if your blood sugar drops when you're sleeping, which could happen from imbalanced meals throughout the day, not enough carbs throughout the day, not enough protein throughout the day, your body does not care that you're asleep. It wants you to get that blood sugar up regardless. So it's going to pump out that cortisol, even if you're dead asleep. And that can look like tossing and turning in the middle of the night. It can look like waking up in the middle of the night. It could also just look like waking up and maybe like waking up in the morning and just not feeling rested, even if you did sleep throughout the night. So, blood sugar is a sneaky cortisol kind of partner, if you will. So, I mentioned before that carbs are your body's preferred source of energy. This is because they are digested and absorbed most quickly into the bloodstream. So, if you eat carbs alone, it can result in an elevation in blood sugar pretty quickly. And unless you are using that energy immediately, like if you're having a banana before you go move your body, then that glucose is going to get used. So that doesn't really count. But for most of the time, if you're like sitting down and having breakfast before you work or lunch, and you're going to be sitting at a desk or just doing anything but like structured movement, you are going to want to balance that plate so that we don't have these sort of peaks and valleys of blood sugar, and we can go to these like nice gentle rolling hills. So we do want the carb. Ideally, we would have about a quarter plate of a starchy carb. And when I say starchy carb, I mean the whole grains, a starchy vegetable, a bean. For starchy vegetables, you're going to have peas, corn, and potatoes. Those are your starchy vegetables. We have the squash variety that I would say is like a mid-starchy, the tubers. And then the rest, I would honestly call non-starchy vegetables. Like, sure, spinach and cauliflower, yes, those are a carb, but that's not going to really count to meet your carb needs. You're not going to get to 30 to 60 grams of carbs with spinach and cauliflower and like leafy vegetables. So, quarter plate carb, quarter plate protein, and about half a plate of non-starchy veggies, and then like a serving or two of fat. Again, this is like you might be cooking with the fat, it might be a dressing, it might be a little bit of avocado on top, it could be nuts on the side, but that's why it doesn't say like, plus 1 teaspoon of fat, because it could look like anything. But the formula is basically carb, protein, fat, and fiber. So I really like to adopt this lens of abundance over restriction when it comes to our meals. And so when you're putting your plate together, rather than thinking about, oh, well, is this too much? Should I not be having this? Am I going over XYZ that I think is appropriate for me? I would look at it and say, okay, have I checked off all my boxes? Is there anything on here that I can add to this to make it even better for me? So, what can I add rather than what should I not be having? What should I be taking away? And you'll notice once you start to pair your meals like this, you might feel satisfied for a little bit longer. Anxiety is another big one. If you are someone who has low blood sugar, which could be a result of skipping meals or having meals that are either not enough carb or mostly carb. So we have that spike and then that fall. Going back to your body doesn't want to be in that low blood sugar state. It's going to fix that by pumping out cortisol. And sure, in that moment, it is functioning as a glucocorticoid. But we also have to remember that cortisol is an activating and an awakening hormone. So it can feel like anxiety. Your body's trying to protect you, but that might feel not so good. So you might notice that that improves as well. Eating mostly whole foods. Okay, so this is an important one because you can have balanced meals. You can be hitting your macros and you can still have nutrient gaps. You can still be like undernourished. And I would say like beware of the macro trap, the protein bar trap. I see this very often when new clients come to me and they're like having a lot of bars or a lot of powders, protein powders and whatnot, and just really focusing on like hitting the macros. And sometimes they're not with whole foods, and that leads to micronutrient gaps. Like I always use Quest bars as an example, although I like to think those are phasing out of the trend. But like, sure, 20 grams of protein and 250 calories and no sugar, and it tastes great. I used to eat them in high school. I get it. But even though you're getting 20 grams of protein and maybe it's not that high in calories, you have like next to no micronutrients, right? In terms of what's feeding your thyroid, what's feeding your mitochondria, etc. So beware of eating a lot of ultra processed foods that might have a lot of protein in them or not that many calories in them because they're not going to, sure, they're going to hit your macro goals, but they're probably not going to hit your micro goals. And those are just as important as the macronutrients. So just wanted to make that quick note there. And then master your meal timing. So ideally, this is how we would be eating throughout the day. And this is true for cycling women, cycling females. If you are in menopause or after, if you are a male, then this is not necessarily applicable for you. But ideally, we would be eating within 90 minutes of waking up. And then throughout the day, every 3 to 5 hours, we would be eating again. And then we would be sort of closing the kitchen before like 2 to 3 hours before bed. And this is only because your body, despite the fact that your body is multitasking all day, every single second of the day, for some reason, we're a little finicky when it comes to digesting and sleeping at the same time, right? If your body is like digesting a steak, you're probably not going to be pumping out that melatonin, right? So, of course, if you get home from work late or whatever the situation is and you need to eat and you're hungry, eat. I would always recommend that you eat dinner at 9 and not eat at all and then go to bed at 10. But if you had all the freedom in the world and you got to paint your day and pick your schedule perfectly, we would be sort of closing out food like 2-ish hours before bedtime. This will not look the same every day. This is not meant to be like, here you go follow this. And if you eat 2.5 hours or 6 hours later, throw it all away. That's not what I'm saying, but just a general guideline, a reference range. And you can start to pay attention to your own hunger and fullness and energy levels throughout the day. Like you might notice as you are maybe like rehabbing your hunger fullness cues that maybe you actually can't make it from 7:30 to noon anymore without eating when you only had a protein bar or you just had some coffee with collagen in it or something like that. So start to pay attention. You'll also notice this, your hunger will shift as you move throughout your cycle as well. But the reason for this meal timing is for your blood sugar and for your cortisol as well. So again, if we are not eating in the morning, then we got to run on something. So it's usually running on cortisol. And then every 3 to 5 hours throughout the day, because if we are eating appropriate amounts of food in appropriate combinations and portions, then we should be able to ride this blood sugar for like 4-ish hours. I give 3 to 5 hours, but 4 hours is a good sweet spot for people. But if we're going longer than 5 hours, that's when we end up in this crash. And then that's when we end up with the excess cortisol production. And we don't want to be there either. We don't want to be too high. We don't want to be too low. The body likes to be in this like even homeostasis as much as possible. So too high and too low are both stressful on the body in their own ways. So if you are someone who maybe you have lunch at noon and dinner is at 6, I would love if we could get a snack in even at like 4. This doesn't have to be perfect, right? You could have breakfast within 90 minutes of waking, and then you could have dinner or lunch, excuse me, 3 hours later, and then you can have lunch 4 hours later, and then you could have a snack 2 hours later, and then you can have dinner 2 hours after that, right? It doesn't always have to be, oh, it hasn't been 3 hours, I can't eat yet. But we also want to kind of be thinking ahead. Okay, maybe I'm not that hungry right now, but I'm about to enter like a 3-hour thing where I'm not going to be able to eat. And it's actually been 3 hours since I ate last. So maybe I'm going to have a small snack now, right? And it's kind of just thinking ahead, forecasting your day a little bit so that you are not accidentally going too long without eating. The lunch to dinner stretch is probably the most common thing that I see, people just going too long without eating. So that afternoon snack can be really helpful. And then also skipping breakfast is a very popular one as well. And if you are not hungry for breakfast, you don't need to like force feed yourself a massive gourmet meal tomorrow, but we can start slow, right? Even if you are someone who the thought of food is nauseating in the morning, but I will have coffee. Okay, can we get some collagen and maybe even like some MCT oil in your coffee. Or maybe it's just like a heavy cream, just starting really small in that way. Maybe you do something like a hard-boiled egg. Maybe you do like protein powder with water just to get something and then build off of that. Of course, the goal is to get us eating whole foods most of the time, every 3 hours, every few hours throughout the day, I should say. But I also don't want you to force feed yourself either. There is research to show that if we are enjoying our food, we will absorb more of the nutrients from it. So I don't want you gagging anything down just for the sake of health. And so, just a little bit of an invitation to tune into the shifts in your energy and your hunger levels as you start to fuel yourself in this way, and start to notice that you might just feel a little bit more online with your body in terms of like, ooh, actually, I am going to tweak this and how I'm eating because of where I'm at my cycle. You might start to notice those shifts, but also you might start to notice that your intuition is speaking to you a little bit louder if we're not feeling anxious from a physical place anymore. But the better you can hear your body, the better you can hear your soul. So, quick summary. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking so fast because I wanted to make sure that we got through this and we get to questions. So, foundations for eating for not just health and energy, but also hormone health. This information is really like pertinent to everybody, not just cycling people. We really need to be making sure that, there are specific foods that you can eat for your cycle, and I have a free handout on that you guys can all have. But what I see that's more important than like micronutrients for cycle syncing or cycle alignment are these foundations. Are your baseline needs being met? Is your blood sugar balanced? Are you eating enough carbs? Are you getting enough protein? And then once we're there, ooh, maybe I'll play around with a little bit of broccoli sprouts or some cruciferous vegetables when I'm ovulating. Of course, those things are great to do, but if you're going to focus on one thing and prioritize your time and energy, we'll start here and then build on that. And also keeping in mind that if you never feel hungry, that is not a flex. I do feel like I was raised to look at hunger as something that is meant to be suppressed. The less hungry I felt, the better. It felt like a win if I was not hungry. And that is not the case if you are feeling like that is true for you. And also, it doesn't have to be like that. Where you're at right now is not necessarily your destiny. I hear very often, oh, I just have a slow metabolism. And be careful with your words because the way that you speak to yourself is very powerful. I am is the most powerful thing you can say. If you say I am blank, your body and your brain are like, got it, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm just a tired person. I've always been this way. Try to release that and recognize you have so much power and your metabolism can be healed. Your hunger fullness cues can be brought back online. And that is all I have for you. So, of course, we'll go over the chat, but if you are interested in diving in, I have 90-minute deep dives available, and I also do more high touch coaching from on like a monthly basis. So, if you're interested about that, we can definitely chat, but I would love to get into the Q&A. So,
Okay. There are a couple of questions and I have them all organized for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask.
oh, you're the best.
So one of the questions, and sorry, I didn't write down people's names who asked them, so I'm just going to go through them, but was more about, and we read this out loud, I think, about eating in the first hour of the day and feeling sluggish immediately after. I did follow
Mhm.
up and ask her what it was that she was eating because what you're putting in your body is obviously important. And she said a sausage and egg breakfast sandwich made with an English muffin, homemade, not store-bought. And she said maybe it's the bread. I don't know.
I'm wondering how you feel having the sausages regularly. Like that could be too heavy. Also, are English muffins something that you usually eat? And if you want to actually chime in,
The sausage, yeah, maybe.
because sometimes if you're feeling sluggish, muffins not usually. So if you have the English muffin with something else, like I wonder what it would feel like even if you just switched out like that for like an avocado toast with eggs English muffin, how that would feel. Yes, you don't need to be afraid of bread. Like sometimes, and so without the sausage, it will be a little bit lower protein. So maybe you do the cottage cheese, maybe you put some collagen in a beverage. But the only reason why in the past I would expect someone to feel sluggish after eating bread is if they were having like a blood sugar response because it wasn't balanced, or if they maybe were like sensitive to gluten and didn't know it.
Maybe, Shayla, you could explain a blood sugar response to bread and it not being balanced. What would that look like?
What would it feel like, or what would the meal be?
What would the meal look like that would be not balanced?
Mm. I would say even like bread or English muffin with peanut butter. I would call that like that can be a snack. That's not a meal. Bread with avocado, that would still not really count. But something that I see very often is like bread with jam. That's definitely going to be imbalanced because like the peanut butter and the avocado, I think are kind of sneaky because the peanut butter is going to have a little bit of protein, there'll be some fat, so it's not going to be a full blood sugar spike, but it's not going to have that those all of those check boxes for a balanced meal. Um, and same thing with the avocado, like you're going to get some fat from that, but it's not going to take us as far. I would say like something that I see is toast with banana and peanut butter. That one is, you would want to be mindful about that because we're kind of doubling the carb without having adequate like fats and proteins to balance that out. So
Hmm.
like bread with fruit, bread with jam, potatoes with fruit, potatoes with jam. Um, yeah, butter, bread with butter, same
What I'm
thing.
hearing it that's missing is that kind of fiber and protein. Is that right?
Yes. The fiber and the protein are probably the two things that are missing the most that I see.
Okay. Yeah. And so your recommendation here could potentially be the avocado toast with eggs. Or one of the things I like too is like toast, cottage cheese on the toast, avocado on top of that, and then eggs. So like
Mhm.
kind of like adding some protein or like layering it a little bit.
Yeah. And like, I feel like that would almost also expand the meal,
Hmm.
the volume of it too, if that's something
Yeah,
that's
because if
in.
I just do eggs and toast, I'm like, I need a little bit more than that. And
Mhm.
especially if I'm getting the egg ick, which I think a lot of us have experienced the egg ick, where
Yes.
I'm
It's such
like,
a
I'm
thing.
like, I can really only do one egg today. Then the cottage cheese is kind of there to back me up on the protein.
I like that. Maybe whole wheat bread for the fiber. For sure, I would just be mindful of the fiber in the bread. Like, is it inulin or like a fiber one bread? I for bread brands, I typically recommend Dave's Killer Bread is a great brand that people typically like. If you are someone who is gluten free, I like Simple Needs. And those are probably my top two.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm really hoping to up my strength training, so I need to get more protein. So thank you, ladies, for sharing this breakfast stuff. Yes. And I think even if we're not strength training, protein is gonna activate your muscles similarly and also satiate us and give us energy. So strength training or not, like up the protein. That's my
Protein is
sense.
important. I like that.
Oh, I can't hear you. Can everyone still hear her? Oh, you okay. Everyone can hear you, but I can't. Weird.
Still can't.
Oh, gotcha.
How about now?
Yep, got you.
Okay.
Okay, another
Everyone still can't.
question is what diet recommendations can you make for vegetarians and vegans who follow the lifestyle for ethical reasons and are not open to meat at all?
Okay, so I feel like vegetarian and vegan, we have a lot more wiggle room with vegetarian. So is it vegan or
You said
vegetarian?
vegetarians and vegans, so I'm not sure. Maybe she can clarify in the chat.
That would be helpful. I mean, if you are a vegetarian, eggs and dairy are fantastic if you can tolerate dairy. Eggs are great. Even like egg whites, fish, if you're someone who does fish. But sticking with just plant-based recommendations, let's see, I am vegetarian. Okay, thank you. That is helpful. So, for a plant-based I think that a good protein powder will be really helpful with hitting those goals. In which case pea proteins are typically decent for that one. I like the brand Truvani. They're they're pea, yeah. And then for proteins, I like lentils because they're going to be higher in protein than like a black bean or something like that. Soy can be beneficial. I'll sometimes like immersion blend tofu into a soup or something like that. Um, let's see. Monica, do you have any other ideas? I'm like so detached. Like it's gonna be just a lot of like adding smaller amounts of protein into one meal.
Yeah. What am I blanking on? But they're really good in omegas too. Hemp seeds.
Oh, yes, hemp seeds are great.
I add those all the time as a non-vegetarian, just like to salads or salad dressings, or like they're kind of a little nutty flavor and you can't really tell they're there. So I will just add those into things like on top. Um, Nuts, seeds, beans, non-GMO soy, layer them in.
I would say layering, yes. You're
I think
definitely
it's
gonna
just the
layer.
hardest thing with vegan and vegetarian is the amount of carbs that you end up consuming to get to that protein threshold. So it does become challenging. Um, and I think there is part of that just coming along with the choice to not eat the animal protein.
And for the ethical conversation, I mean, everyone is different in terms of like what's important to you, but I know that some of like, if maybe you would do like bone broth or something like that. I
Mhm.
know there are brands who, have regenerative farming practices in terms of like the ethics of both the animal welfare and the environment impact. And they're using the bones that were already going to be in a cow that's being turned into food anyways, which I think maybe for some people you'd like that lands a little bit better. Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one, and it is a choice,
Mhm.
and challenging for sure. And can definitely understand that choice. Um, so hard.
High quality dairy maybe would feel better.
Hmm. Eggs. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully we gave you some ideas that you didn't already know, but another question. This is a good one. My healthcare provider suggested intermittent fasting for my blood sugars, and it helped me for months, but then my sugars went back up. Why do healthcare professionals recommend this? I have thoughts, but would love to hear yours too, Shayla.
So my thoughts are that yes, it can help for a short period of time. Um, and it's not something that typically sticks. Like this is actually something that I have heard before. I mean, it's similar to how it might feel good to be low carb for a little bit, and then you're kind of like again running on that cortisol, almost this like adrenaline like feeling, and then it does kind of stop working because I like to compare it to, and obviously this isn't the same, but ketosis is a survival mechanism that the body wasn't really ever meant to be in for extended periods of time. I would say that's like a similar concept for females who are fasting or doing intermittent fasting. But for why doctors recommend it, I genuinely just think or do harm. I think that it's just like old school research. I'm also wondering, how open-minded your doctor was. If they, I know like some of like the old time doctors are really not very open to new research or new information. Not to be ageist, that's not always the case, right? But that would be my personal take.
One of the things I'm always curious about too is when I hear intermittent fasting, is that there is some level of misconception around what a normal fast is. Because, like, I noticed, Shayla, in your presentation, you talked about not eating 2 to 3 hours before we go to bed. And then hopefully we're going to bed for 7 to 9 hours. And so an overnight fast, which, can be 10, 11, 12 hours potentially, um, that's good. We have to have the rest and digest cycle. That's my understanding. And so a lot of times doctors can be wanting us to make sure that we are getting the rest and digest normal cycle of sleeping and letting our body digest our food. And so that is technically a fast. But then there's this like intermittent fasting that's come out where, people aren't eating until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which like, God, I would die. Um, so I would just be curious of how your doctor was using that term and if maybe they were just wanting to make sure that you were getting your nighttime fasting window.
That's such a good point. Yeah, like I recommend an overnight fast of like 12 hours. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty solid. I don't recommend that people go longer than 14 hours, but we do naturally fast overnight. So that's
So
a good
I'd be
point.
maybe curious about that, and you could ask for clarification with them too. But I agree with what Shayla said, is that like some doctors are just getting information from interesting sources, and fasting differs male versus female. So they may have read something that was male research, and is not necessarily ideal for females. So I'd be curious when someone mentions something if the research was male or female based.
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of the research is not done on cycling females, because we're so hard to have as a control, which is like nonsense. But yeah, that is something to consider. A lot of the research out there has been done on males.
And there is some differing research too for postmenopausal women with fasting, that so it can vary. Be curious about what you're hearing. Okay, this is a great question. Can you give some ideas of the somatic practices that you incorporate into your routine and how you feel like this has impacted your symptoms, cycle, and metabolism?
Mm, yes, love this question. So I use somatics for both myself and my clients often for binging. So if you are someone who like overeats or thinks about food a lot, or what you would think of as conventionally binging, something that I would recommend is like sitting. I like to use tapping. It's difficult to, I would just say like tapping is a good one. So even if you could like search on YouTube like tapping for binging, or reach out to me and we can talk about it. But specifically for how it's impacted like my symptoms and cycle and metabolism, I also was for myself like holding on to a lot of experiences and energy from the past in my own body that were sort of manifesting physically. I mentioned before like the sense of body safety, and I think that how that impacts your metabolism and how somatics can weave into that is how, if especially if you're someone who might be like holding on to weight or experiencing weight loss resistance, I like to use the term weight release rather than weight loss, right? Especially if we're thinking about it from this point of like protective mechanism and your body's holding on to weight. How can we use somatics to maybe like release any emotions, experiences, traumas that your body is holding on to, so that your body feels safe enough to not have to hold on so tight, right? Because we only have so many protective mechanisms, and holding on to weight is certainly one of them. In terms of my cycle, like womb space somatic meditations have been powerful for me as well, especially if you're someone who maybe has a complicated relationship with your cycle. It took me a really long time to sort of heal my own relationship with my cycle when it was missing for so long, and I was so frustrated with it, so frustrated with my body. And I kind of sat with like one example would be, okay, really sitting with what's the emotion that I feel about my cycle? Where do I feel that in my body? Meditating on that space, breathing into it, moving around. It's kind of challenging to explain in like this way without doing it. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. And if
Yeah.
you have specific questions about what I just said, feel free to put them in the chat.
Yeah, I think that was helpful. Okay, another question. Yeah, any follow-up questions on somatics? Definitely follow up with Shayla, her wheelhouse for sure. Chantel asked, do you know about luteal phase extreme hunger? What is the reason for this? Also, what to eat to have a regular cycle and prolong, avoid perimenopause. So maybe the luteal phase we can tackle first, which if you feel really hungry in your luteal phase, normal, 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 normal.
Yes. It is normal. One, because your body actually just needs more energy, right? So your literal metabolism is increasing. And if you are someone who tracks your cycle, you might actually even be able to see that as an increase in your basal body temperature, right? Like when we move, we create heat, right? So if we're thinking about your body working harder and expending energy, we're creating that heat. So you'll see that uptick in your basal body temperature. But also our insulin response and our glucose tolerance is going to change in our luteal phase as well. We're a little bit more insulin resistant in your luteal phase. So with the combination of higher energy needs and this glucose response, we're more susceptible to blood sugar spikes. And so what that can also feel like when we have your blood sugar go up and then come back down, like when your blood sugar drops, that can also feel like hunger. So if you're eating a bunch of crackers and without anything with it, that might feel like satiating in the moment. And then like an hour later, you're hungry again. It's because you didn't have like adequate fat. We can use dietary fat a little bit more effectively as fuel in our luteal phase. So increasing your protein and your fat intake in your luteal phase can help with that. Same thing with fiber. And also just trying to like stay ahead of your hunger. Recognize that it is real. Your body is actually asking for more food and shifting out of this like, oh, I shouldn't be hungry right now. Can I just eat a tiny little bit more to maybe like squash it in this moment so that I can move on with my day, but rather, okay, recognizing my body is asking more food for more food. It's asking for more nourishment. Can I like sit down, put food on a plate and have like an eating experience and actually satiate that hunger, feed that hunger, and then kind of just course correct, right? If you notice, oh, wow, here we are again, 2 hours later, still hungry. How can you just adjust to meet those needs? I think that prepping ahead of time can be really helpful. Like I'm a big fan of a hard-boiled egg in my luteal phase. They're just like really easy, but just having awareness. And then I don't think you can avoid a perimenopause. I think that's just a part of life, right?
Yeah, I don't think you can avoid it. I think that a lot of times people are like scared of the symptoms or the change. And I think if you are creating awareness, and having balanced cycles while you're cycling, that as things start to change too, like all of those habits and lifestyle thoughts, what we put on our plate, balancing our blood sugar, like carry into perimenopause and menopause and are beneficial for that life cycle as well. Do you agree?
For sure. Like I would just say continue to support your hormones as much as you can and also recognize that it's a natural process. I have had clients feel great on hormone replacement therapy. I think
Mhm.
that's a personal choice. And I've also had clients who just sort of welcome it as, okay, this is what my body wants to do. This is my next phase of life, and we're just kind of lean into that.
Mm.
So rebalance, I think that outside of just like baseline taking care of yourself and supporting your health hormones and eating lots of nutritious foods and balancing your plates and all these things, blood sugar, etc. I think that like rebalance, if we're thinking about trying to like pause time or move backwards, I would say like the hormone replacement therapy is how you would do that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of varying opinions around that.
Mhm.
But yeah. It is
It's a
hard.
person.
Aging is such a, excuse my French, but mind fuck. So, Chantel, I feel you on that of like wanting to kind of claw back almost.
Yeah. I have had clients who I really like to talk about like the archetypes of your phases of the cycle as well. And I'm not sure if people are familiar with that, but like the maiden being your follicular phase. Monica, do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
Ooh, okay. So I won't talk about it too for too long, but kind of just like shifting with the energy of your cycle, like being more energetic in your follicular phase and a little bit more slower in your luteal phase. And your intuition is also higher when you're bleeding as well. So the archetypes of your cycle. So your follicular phase is the maiden. And if you think about like your young, youthful, spring-like energy, maybe a little flirtatious, ovulation is the mother. And even if you are not like actually conceiving at ovulation, you're really creative, right? And you might be birthing other things into the world. Luteal phase is supposed to be like the wild woman. And this, I think, is a more commonly known archetype, where it's just like a little bit more sure of yourself. I don't give a, excuse my French, fuck about society. I just like am who I am sort of energy. And then your menstrual phase is like the wise woman. And so a lot of people will talk about shifting into perimenopause and menopause as like really embracing like the wild woman archetype. So that could be one way to just like embrace the change of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Super interesting. Okay, well, we are past time, so I want to be sensitive to your time, Shelagh. So grateful for you sharing. This recording will be available inside the community, and I'll share that link. Sounds like a personality disorder. Hopefully, everyone who joined today, you feel like you learned something and that you were supported in your questions. Definitely go follow Shelagh on social and reach out to her if you have any questions. And thank you so much for spending this hour with us. We're so grateful for you being here.
Thank you all. It was great to be here with you. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or needs anything, why did I? That's the wrong. I just wrote the wrong thing in the chat. That's
Um,
my YouTube.
I'll share your stuff in the group as well, and it's linked. Everything's linked there. But thank you so much. So
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Have a great day, everybody.